Hi everyone, my name's Jack. In this video, we're going to talk about API testing in Bruno. So Bruno is an open source alternative to API test runners like Postman or Insomnia. It's free and open source and is becoming really popular amongst QA testers. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to set up Bruno, make requests, and test a real application with a user authentication flow. So first thing, you want to install Bruno from usebruno.com/downloads. And then when you open up the Bruno app, we're greeted with this welcome page. So we can organize our tests and requests into collections. And these collections can be stored in Git. So we don't need an account with Postman to store our collections and share them. So I'm going to demonstrate how to test a basic health endpoint using a new request. So let's create a collection here. We'll give it a name. And we'll call it basic test. And we can choose a location for this on our computer. And we can sync that with a Git repository if we like. So I'm going to save mine in a Bruno folder and we'll create that. Now on the left-hand side, we can see our collection. So we can add a request to that. So I'm going to call this the health test. And we're going to call a server endpoint. And we're going to call a health endpoint. Let's enable JavaScript execution and click Save. Okay, so now we can send a request to this endpoint and see what happens. All right, so we get a response OK. And we can inspect the headers of the response and we can write tests for this request. So you see on the left-hand side here, we've got the request method and the URL, and here we can add parameters. We can add a body if we're posting something, authentication, and we can also use scripts. So the scripts allow us to save variables or make assertions about different parts of the request and response cycle. Okay, so to write a test for this request, I'm consulting the Bruno docs here, and you can see that we can copy these blocks into our testing area. So I'm going to paste that and say, should be able to call health endpoint, and we can say that the status should be a 200. So we're using a global here, res, and we're calling get status on that. So now if I save this and run it again, we can see that the tests are passing. So what I've just demonstrated is the ability to call a API server in Bruno and write a test about the response. So the goal of a collection is to build up a series of steps in a test that store values between them and make assertions about the requests and responses. And this allows us to test APIs end to end. So in order to demonstrate a more meaningful test, let's use Bruno to test the authentication process of our demo application, the Strawberry app. So this allows us to sign up with an email address and password, and the application submits that data to the test application sign up form post method. And we could use Bruno to test this sign up process by sending a post request with form data in it to match this form. After I sign up, the application will send a confirmation code to my email account. So I need to open the email, insert the code here to confirm my account. Then I can log in and see the authenticated dashboard. So to write an integration test for this authentication flow, we're going to post data in Bruno to these form endpoints, and we're going to use disposable email accounts from MailSlip to create a new email address, receive the confirmation code, extract out that code, and then submit it to confirm the user's account. So MailSlip is a free service that lets you create email addresses on demand using an API. You can find the API documentation for MailSlip at docs.mailslip.com/API, and we'll use these endpoints within our test to create a new email address. Okay, so back to Bruno. Let's create a new collection, and we'll call this the authentication testing, and we'll find a location for that. Select the Bruno folder on our computer. Now in the authentication testing area, we can add a new request. So okay, so for our health request, let's add a test here to assert that we get the right return value. So it should return a 200. Let's save that and run it. Great, our tests are passing, and we can see in the response it's actually loading the website. Okay, so now let's create a real email account, and we can use that to test the sign-up process. So we'll say create inbox, and we're going to make a post request to api.mouselab.com/inboxes/with defaults. And here we want to add some authentication. So we will add an API key authentication, and we'll type in X API key, and then here we can add an API key variable. So if we go to app.mouselab.com and log into our account, we can find a Mouselab API key here. And we will define a new collection environment. Create environment, we'll call this test. And here we'll add a variable, say API key, and we can paste in our API key there, and we'll make that a secret, and then let's save that. Now, if we hit this endpoint, we can create a new email address. And there's the results. So Mouselab has returned to us an email address and an ID, and we can use this in our sign-up test in the next step. So in order to do that, we need to use a script to save some variables. So the way that we store values between our requests in our collection is to use a post response script. And you type BRU for Bruno, set var, give it a name, and then we can read a variable out of this response using res get body, and then .id. So I want to save this ID like that. And I'm going to save the email address as well. We'll say res get body email address. Okay, and we can save that. And we should probably also put a test here so that we have the right response. So I'm going to just copy this test, and we're going to say that it's a 201, and we'll say should create email. All right, let's run this. We can see our test is passing. That's great. Now, in the next step, when we want to sign up with our test application, we can call post HTTPS to my application endpoint. And then we can add some query parameters. So I'm going to say the email address, and we're going to use the variable we set email address. And we can see it's green here. That means that Bruno is aware of this email address, and it should work as long as we run it after the previous step. And we're also going to say a password, and a password can just be password for now because this is just a test. We're going to save that. Now let's run this and see what happens. Great. Okay, so it's 200 okay. We submitted the email address and the password, and Bruno is showing us this confirm screen requiring our code and the email address to log in. So how do we extract the code for this email? So we need to wait for this email to arrive in Mouselab and then use a regex to extract out the value we want. So I'm going to create a new request now, and we'll call this wait for email. We're going to call api.mouselab.com/wait for latest email. All right, and we'll enable our authentication. We'll say X API key equals API key like that. And for the parameters, we want to say the inbox ID and use our inbox ID we saved earlier. We'll add a timeout. So this is how long we want to wait for an email. I'm going to say 60 seconds and milliseconds. And we're going to also say we want unread only, so that we wait for the first unread email in this inbox. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to pass the response and store the email ID as a variable. So here I'm going to say the email ID is that value. We can get rid of that. And we should put a test here as well. And the test should say that it's a 2xx. So let's run this now and see what happens. All right, the email has been returned. So we were able to submit a real email address in our sign-up form using Bruno, and then call the mail slip, wait for latest email endpoint, and receive that email. So if we scroll down through this email, we can see somewhere in here a confirmation code. Here it is. So your confirmation code is, and then this string here. So what we could do is just copy the string and paste it into the next request for our confirm user endpoint, but we want to make this test repeatable so that we can run it as an automated test of our API sign-up process. So we want to use a regex to extract this value. So if we have a look at the mail slip documentation, the get email content match method allows us to pass a email ID and a pattern, and the pattern can be a regex with a capture group. And this will allow us to extract out the code from this email and then use it in our confirmation step. So let's now create a new request. We'll say get code, and we'll make a post request to https api.mailslip and this endpoint and email ID, use a variable like that. And if we want to send a body, we'll send some JSON, and we want a pattern. And the pattern is going to match code is like that. So this should match the email we received and extract out the code like that. And we have the email ID there. So let's run this and see what happens. Okay, it's saying it's unauthenticated. We forgot to add the authentication. So let's go to X API key and type our mailslip API key value like that. Let's run it again. Great. Okay, so we can see in the matches here, our pattern has matched against the email body, and it's returned two values, the full match and the group. So if we store this matches first index or index 1, we can use that in a next step to submit the confirmation code. So in scripts, if I say bool.setVar, and then we're going to give it a name of code, and then we can say res get body matches 1, like that. Okay, let's run that. Excellent. In the next step, we can confirm the user. So we'll add a request and we'll say confirm user, a post request to our test application. And we will add a param of our email address. Okay, and our code. And if we run that, we see that the user has been confirmed. So now the last step is just to log in with the correct user and see if we get a good response. So I'm going to copy that and add a final request, login. We're going to do a post to the login endpoint. I'm going to pass my email address, and my password was just password. Now we'll send that, and login successful. Great. Let's finally just add a test at the end. The response was a 200, so we'll say it should be a 200. And we'll say it should be able to log in. We'll make sure there is a test for all our steps. All right, so now let's run our. So we'll click Run Collection. You can see the health endpoint passed. It's creating an inbox. It's submitting the sign up. It's waiting for the email. It got the code. It confirmed the user, and it was able to log in. So now we have a repeatable, shareable integration test for our API, and we can run this anytime to know that the sign up and confirmation code process works. This is really valuable if you're a QA tester or a developer and you want to be confident that your API is working correctly. So one cool aspect about Bruno, as opposed to Postman or Insomnia, is that you can version control and edit all your collections. So if I open up the Bruno folder where we created these collections in VS Code, I can see all the files associated with these requests. Bruno also has a CLI that allows us to run commands from a terminal without using the UI. So if I navigate to the Bruno folder in my terminal and open up one of my collections, I can actually run npx use Bruno /CLI run in this collection, and it will run all my tests from the command line. This allows you to integrate your Bruno API tests into a CI/CD or automation pipeline. I hope that explained how to use Bruno in your API testing adventures. For more information, please see docs.mailserp.com or our YouTube channel for more.